We are here for another episode of John and Ed's TED Talk Together Tuesday. John's going to be joining in a couple minutes. And then before that, Kyle Hines, one of our founders and the head of sales, is going to be joining. We're going to have a great conversation. So buckle up, get ready for it. We're going to rock and roll today. Check 1, 2. Is this thing on? All right. Well, everybody, it is freezing cold outside, and I'm nice and toasty inside. We are here for another episode of John and Ed's TED Talk Together Tuesday. John's going to be joining in a couple minutes. And then before that, Kyle Hines, one of our founders and the head of sales, is going to be joining. We're going to have a great conversation. So buckle up, get ready for it. We're going to rock and roll today.
All right.
How?
One and only try with this microphone before I fucking bail.
Brother, you got it first time. We're already recording, so you're good to go.
Awesome. I just needed to have you tried turning it off and turning it on again?
That's like the typical, like, what's that old show, the IT Crowd? That's it. Oh, but we lost you.
No more microphone?
Oh, yeah. It just blanked out for a minute, but you're back now. All right.
I discovered that show way after it was over already.
Me too.
And loved it.
I did too. I only found it after I watched Bridesmaids, because that dude is hilarious in whatever his name is. I never remember his name. Chris O'Dowd. Is that his name? I think that's it. Your mic keeps cutting in and out. All right, cool. All right, so what we typically do, Kyle, is as you've seen, there's this. I always start out with like, is this thing on? I gave a little intro while I was waiting for you to join. Let's just check, make sure your mic's back on. Nope, can't hear you. We can cut some of this shit out. We don't need to bore people with this part.
AirPods for the win.
All right, got it. So there's a couple of things that you and I are working on. I'm not even going to try and ask like stupid questions like, oh, are you doing anything cool, Kyle? Hint, hint.
That's what you're working on these days.
Have you ever heard of Trinium or anything related to chips? And so I want you to give kind of the overview of that. But you and I met a handful of years ago. I jumped ship from some really cool shit that I was working on to work with you, and then jumped ship again to work with you here. Give us the 50,000 foot overview that takes you from like throwing pitches and like racking and stacking some plates to where you're at today.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I kind of came into this world honestly. I never set out to be in technology. Didn't get a computer science degree. Had no idea what a terminal was. John, don't say that I still don't. That's subtext. You don't have to say it. So
He's
yeah,
a liar. I saw him at a workshop go through the entire command line and everything, deploying stuff. So he's being modest now.
I'm sure I've never heard of a command line. So yeah, I was in finance. I was trading options and futures, all kinds of derivatives like that. And I remember the day the firm I was working for said that they had spent $1 billion developing the piece of software that we used to trade, $1 billion with a B. And I remember just feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. And I was like, my only understanding of software was like, obviously I knew how to use a laptop, but that was it. I had no concept of development or infrastructure or anything else under it, and just felt like I was hit by a Mack truck. I was like, $1 billion? How is that even possible? And that was the moment for me where I just went, I don't know what this software stuff is, but I need to get into this. I need to figure out what's going on here. What is software? Who's building it? How do they build it? Where are they building it? How do you spend $1 billion building a piece of software? And it's kind of spirals into a couple of other stories, but I was driving up to Red Rocks, which is the historic concert venue here in Colorado. It's amazing. Elvis played there, the Beatles played there. So it's kind of my happy place. And was driving up to Red Rocks with my now wife and said, let's quit. I need to get into technology. You're not happy in finance. We met at work and just said, let's quit. Let's move to Thailand. I think 10 days later, we had sold everything we owned and we're on a plane to Bangkok. And that's when I landed. I just started trying to figure out, how do I get into software? And I didn't start on the technology end because I didn't know how. All I knew to do, the only intuition I had was be a sales guy. So I found this community of expats in Bangkok because I didn't speak the language at all when I landed. And so, I was kind of constrained to the English speaking community to start with, is for obvious reasons. And I found a bunch of expats, found a bunch of folks who had moved, like a real estate investor from Canada and a media entertainment fella from Tel Aviv and another like education type of company from Australia. People who had, some of them had gone on vacation to Bangkok and never came back. Some of them moved very intentionally and whatever. So I just found myself just jumping right into the business of saying, what is your business? What piece of software moves your business forward, or what customer experience, or what website, or whatever? And in the beginning, I was outsourcing 100% of my development because I literally had no clue. And I found myself in a position that I think a lot of our customers find themselves in, which is you can go hire some big consultancy with their huge, expensive framework, or you could piece together individual engineers on your own. I chose the latter and I felt every pain. I made every mistake. I had every failure that you could have down that path. And I just, it's a lot of herding cats. It's a lot of, back then it was a bunch of different platforms that I think all bundled together became Upwork. So it was like Elance and Odesk and a bunch of these old companies that were doing straight up, what Upwork does now and what Fiverr and those types do. So I was just piecing it together that way. And so I made the first chunk of that business delivering custom WordPress websites where I customized none of it. I just sold the end vision, contracted some engineering help out the back door. And after a while doing that, maybe I'm a control freak, but I found a little bit of heartache down that, like not having real control of the solution. And I still wanted to know more. I wanted to know more about like, what does really good development look like? What's the difference? Is there, I read these articles about somebody at one of the big tech companies as a distinguished engineer makes $3 million. And then I'm paying folks way less than that, hourly rate contractors. And I was just trying to grok, what's the difference? Like, what does good software look like? What does good delivery look like? And started insourcing, teaching myself how to write Python, just taking like every course on the internet that I could possibly take. Everybody who's out there selling training courses has received my money at one time or another during that journey. Probably more than I'd like to admit I spent down that role. I should have just gone and get a CS degree from some real school.
Right.
But that started insourcing it and started to understand a little bit more of like, I could slap together a Flask app in Python, but I started to understand, I think where really good software comes in is how did this scale? Like the applications that I was using that I was delivering usually had like 2 to 20 users in the early days. So performance needs, basically none. Security needs, what's security? Scalability, reliability, availability. These are words that like my customers at the time, they knew them as English words and that's it. They didn't have any concept of a performance requirement or a reliability requirement. So I was looking for a place to kind of jump off of the diving board into the deep end of really, graduated, mature, high quality engineering teams. Like how do people build these engineering teams? How do those teams build big scalable performance systems? And long story short, I ended up in a place called CleverSafe, that I had many fond memories of, where we were selling massive object stores. It was like a think tank behind a for-profit company in a way, because there was like 500 granted patents. They didn't take anything from the existing storage industry in terms of tech stack. They took things from like deep space communication, where forward error correction algorithms have to account for the fact that radiation is going to make you lose some of your packets, stuff like that. 500 patents porting that to the storage industry, these massively scalable storage systems. This was 10, 15 years ago, and you think like hundreds of petabytes in one individual storage system. So needless to say there, like you couldn't go to the cafeteria and grab a snack without running into somebody who has 30 patents. And so I got like an immersion, or I don't know what to call it, but like I guess immersion, or a fast class in who's building these wildly performant, scalable systems, and how do they work, and how do they approach technology decisions. And so, I mean, that's how I ended up falling down the rabbit hole into, enterprise tech, and learned a tremendous amount there. I could probably spend the next 45 minutes thanking people who mentored me along my journey of figuring out. Like, I remember I literally asked one of my friends early in that experiment, or in that experience, I'm reading about servers. I'm reading about application servers and web servers and virtual servers, and everything says it's a server. If I buy a server, what shows up in the mail? And he starts explaining to me, like, oh, it's kind of about the size of a pizza box. We have these things, rack units, that measure a standard size of, and then everything on top of that is a software server, because envision the world as clients and servers. And like, I just got the most amazing masterclass in education there that set me off on the right path. And sometime in the experience of having done consulting and professional services by myself, and then seeing what some of the most elite engineering organization in the world, the way they work, I started to see this middle ground of, if I got into services, I could sell. I've been a sales guy my whole life, so I saw it through a sales lens and saw, instead of selling one product, what if I could sell anything?
Yeah.
If I put the work in to build enough trust and enough credibility with the customer that they're going to talk to me about their life and their environment and their fears and their goals and all this stuff, then I've just got one tiny little thing to sell, and not tiny, but one narrow thing to sell. If they don't have that exact problem at that right time, I've just spent all that time building up this trust, this relationship, and I've got nothing to offer them.
Yeah.
Or, I'd go talk to a customer who didn't have 10 petabytes of data, and then it was like, well, yeah, let me know if you're in Denver, because there's nothing I could really do for them from the product side. So then I started to get a little bit more consultative and built some services practices inside of ours that had the enterprise customer relationships already, and never looked back. From there, it just, maybe it's a personality fit, but being able to, already today, what is it, 230 Mountain? We've had conversations with people about data analytics. We've had conversations about DevOps infrastructure. We've had conversations about building new applications from scratch. And it sounds like a lot, but it's really very interconnected engineering subject matter and material. Yeah. So I found myself loving that. I found myself, the change of scenery was exciting, to be able to help with a lot of different problems. Once I got the customer, and interrelated problems, once I got the customer trusting me enough to talk to me, it just stuck.
Yeah.
And I like to think over the last 10 years or so, we've gotten better at it, but yeah, that's what happened. That's how I ended up here.
Well, I know that why I love the idea of the fact that we're focused just on AWS. You went to this like, oh, I'm swimming around in the little kiddie pool, like technology. Yeah. And then you're like, fuck, there's people that swim in the ocean. Cool. Let me go dive in this, like, off this cliff in Mexico. And you learn how to, in that specialist, 500 patent, storage selling. Just to run through it, you also spent some time at IBM and then at various, other shops that we'll kind of glaze over for right now. And what is it that you love about AWS that made you go, I know, I'm going to find a small cohort of guys that I want to be my founders team with me, and we're going to focus on infrastructure, data, and applications?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I feel like we talk about this with customers sometimes, and instead of giving them a commercial on AWS has the most robust and scalable platform, it's like
Right.
all that stuff is true. Like we could talk about how other clouds that shall not be named had entire regions go down because of a flood, and it's
Little
like, hold on,
flood.
how are
Yeah.
all of the availability zones in one building?
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, the real answer though is when we talk to AWS, they're talking about business outcomes. When AWS for the customer, they're talking about business outcomes. I didn't have that experience with the other clouds. I had the experience that it was more akin to talking to IT people about IT challenges and IT problems. And that's not bad, of course. That's the way that the industry has worked for a long time. But I kind of saw an opportunity with when it was AWS that I could just cut everything out.
Yeah.
Like if I knew that I had engineers behind me who knew how to develop applications, who knew how to build data pipelines and structure and architect data warehouses and build automation pipelines and what's the pragmatic balanced way to do monitoring and logging and all this observability stuff that's really complicated. I knew if I had those three engineering skill sets behind me, I could work my way whatever way I could get it in. I could work my way to the C-suite to talk about business outcomes.
Right.
And that was always kind of my game. That was always kind of my angle. And I didn't feel like the other clouds were down for that life. I could, name names, but the last conversation I had with one of the major clouds was a sales rep from that cloud, a sales rep from that company, and a sales rep from another company trying to figure out how to get a customer off of the data warehouse solution that they were very happy with. I've been stuck on that for like 10 years. I still think about it all the time.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a sales cycle where the customer's happy with their data warehouse. So I'm going to spend all of my time and effort trying to convince them that they're wrong.
Right.
Like I always felt Amazon was the only one who would be with you in the journey of just going directly to the customer and saying, where are you today? Point A. Where do you need to get to? Where does the board want you? Where do the customers want you? Where does Wall Street want you? Somebody wants you somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? Like somebody wants something from you. What is it? And then just having those three pieces again, the infrastructure stuff, data stuff, application stuff behind you means you can put together a million different chess pieces on the board. Right. You can say, oh, okay, for this customer in this particular situation, what gets them to their business outcome is fixing a problem in the data pipelines. Done. Let's take that problem. Let's knock it out. Let's hit the single. Let's let everybody else see internally that there was success in this approach. And then, so it's kind of a long answer, but I didn't feel any of the other clouds' willingness to just talk about the way that technology is a means to a business outcome. Yeah. Technology for technology's sake, I couldn't hang in that conversation anyway. If I go to the mat with Johnny Delgado on who's more technical, I'm going to get smoked. But I always felt like there was maybe a lack of other partners out there who were talking about technology explicitly as a means to a business end, explicitly as a means to a business outcome, except for the management consultants, because that's what they do. The McKinseys, the big management consultants, they talk about where does business going, where does it need to be, where's the industry going, but they're not builders. No. With all due respect to them, they buy companies like BUILDSTR because they know they're not builders. And they know they need to sort of like inherit or adopt some of that DNA. Yeah. But that's how it happened.
So kind of a pivot from there. And you and I, there's different ways we've talked about it in the past, maybe in other other past lives that we've had. But you and I look at this aspect of sales and understanding the human component of it. But we call it a shift left of making sure that there's like a technology play, which is part of the reason why Johnny D fits on the team and why Sean Bratcher, who we talked to previously, who leads our delivery, what we say from them is we call it like a shift right, where they can deliver, but they understand the human side of sales. How has that played into your, or maybe I know some of it, but can you just talk a little bit about how that's played into the thought process of when you were like, all right, LLC done. We have our, this is our address that we're going to ship to. Now let's do some shit. What do we, can you talk about that aspect of, the shift left and shift right and how that's at the core of what we're doing, yeah.
Yeah, I think the two subject matters are inextricable, right? Sales has always been about, do we have a way to solve a problem for a customer in a way that they'll pay us money to do it?
Right.
It's just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy, but it is that simple. And then to reduce the engineering side to simplicity, it's just building stuff. But those two things really can't exist without each other, right? If a project isn't sold, the engineers don't have anything to build. And if the engineers build something that nobody's going to pay for, somebody's got to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I think that it started for me a long time ago when I started to, actually a lot of it was when I was selling those big object storage systems.
Yeah.
I felt like I was selling against people who had 20-year relationships with the decision makers. I would go to sell storage to a VP of infrastructure, and my competing storage sales rep was in that VP of infrastructure's wedding as a groomsman. Yeah. Well, that's a problem.
Right.
So, being young in my career at the time and not having 20 years of customer relationships to try to break through that, I was faced with like, how do you get through that? What would that VP of infrastructure possibly have to talk to me about if they have such a deep relationship and so much trust with my competition that they invited them to stand up next to them at their wedding, right? And it was just a consulting motion. It was a consultative motion. The hypothesis at the time was, if I could try to become technical, then maybe I'd have a lot more subject matter that I could advise them on, that I could try to help them work through their problems or reason through how they're going to get A to B. That was the original hypothesis. Every sales manager I had told me not to. Every sales manager that I discussed this with told me it was a crazy idea, told me that it wasn't going to work, told me that I either needed to be a salesperson or a technical person, and that's all there was. There were salespeople and there were technical people. The salespeople who are too interested in the technical stuff aren't real salespeople. That's what I was told a million times. I know there were interviews that I did where the VP of sales kicked me out of the process or didn't choose me for the role because of this methodology I was developing at the time. And I don't blame him, because there are a lot of bodies down that road. But I knew that it could work because I had an example. I had an example back at that company where we were selling big object stores, where one of the VPs of sales was one of the most technical people you'll ever meet. He could bust open his laptop and start writing code at a moment's notice. He could. Should he? That's a different conversation.
Right.
But, so that's what, it's been a decade and a half or so since then. And every day I'm more convinced that the more the salespeople understand their engineering counterparts, the better they are at selling. And the more engineering understands sales and why we do some of the things we do, why we approach things certain ways, and why we throw them into uncertain situations sometimes and say, John, there's a call in 15 minutes. This is going to sound a little crazy, but here's where we're at. That level of like ambiguity and complexity, and it's like, it's ethereal and it's ambiguous, and it's tough to, especially if you've grown up through engineering, when it's like, here are the requirements, I need to build the thing for the requirements. I can't give you that level of black and white in a sales cycle most of the time. So I think that the more we understand the way things get delivered, the better we are at putting projects together.
Yeah.
The more we understand what makes our engineers very happy and very angry, the more we can apply that to what the customer is going through, because the customer has an engineering staff in 95% of our customers.
Right.
Sometimes we have customers who don't have any internal engineering talent, but it's like 95%, maybe 98% if we ran the numbers. Most of them have some engineering staff. So then the more we understand our own engineers, the more we understand what the customer's team is going through. So I at this point, I'm way, the ship sailed a long time ago, but I'm convinced that sales in a consultative selling motion versus like a spray and pray kind of a sales organization, the more we understand the realities of delivery, what makes it good, what makes it bad, the better we can shape deals and shape projects so that they give us both things that we want at the same time, which is it gets the customer where they need to go and we can deliver it at a high quality.
Right. That's why, John, what number am I thinking of right now?
7.
See, we're on
Nailed
the
it.
same, you know,
Nailed it.
we just, it's in our,
It's uncanny.
it's in our DNA. We can communicate telepathically. I don't know, Johnny D, where's your head at with this topic of shift left, shift right? Any thoughts? Any questions for Kyle?
So when I had my first interview with Kyle before I came to BUILDSTR, we talked basically all about this, and then he gave me some insight on some of his previous mentorships and different things like that too. And before I came into tech, I was selling shoes at Foot Locker and Champ Sports, right? So I've come a long way from that too. But I think it always comes back down to that customer centric and like really wanting to solve problems in a way that benefits the customer, right? And I really think that's like one of our like strategic advantages and just a core value that we have here, which is super amazing. And Kyle and I have talked about this before as well, about like he's being very modest on his technical skills. He's being very, very modest. Where I was telling him, I was like, dude, like your problem solving skills, the way you're able to understand what the customer is trying to do, the business outcomes, the technology that's going to take you there, and the conversations you're about to have, where you're not really a salesman, you're a problem solver, and then the byproduct of that is sales, really, which is kind of crazy. And the same thing with you, Ed, too. Like it's been very crazy coming here and seeing a bunch of people with similar mindsets that just synchronize together and have that synergy, because from sales to delivery, having more synergy like just equals a better product and a better customer experience overall. Like,
right.
So,
right. Yeah. Look, I've said it before, so the people that listen and you guys are probably like, shut up. The reason once I was like, I'm done with academia, I got to get out of here, and I became a data engineer, I had this like crisis of conscience. And what I'm building towards is like, AWS folks, definitely like close your ears right now. Some of the LPs, they're just smoke. Like they don't really have value, but some of them are like the reason I'm here. And LP1, like customer obsession, the reason I stayed is, as a data engineer, I had this crisis of conscience where I was like, I'm just making greedy people rich. And I got kind of sick of it. And I was going to go back to academia because I was like, at least there I'm making the world a better place. But then the next Monday morning, I had this epiphany that every action that I do, it's like the slice as x goes to infinity, that initial calculus equation that you learn. It's like, when I make a good sale, then I'm getting work for my cool engineering teams that got great work to do. They've got something awesome to do, and then they can make money and put food on the table and have a good life for their families. And then they're providing a good project for our customers, and their customers are trying to do cool stuff and make money and do stuff for their end customers, and it's making their end customers' lives better. And it's also making our company have value, and the people who started it have moment. It's like everything that I did, I could either look at it in this like, jaded way of like, oh, I'm just making greedy people rich. Like, and that's so stupid. That's a small perspective of reality of like, actually, I can take that like old movie, pay it forward and go, every single thing that I do, I can do it with the intent inside of me to try and make that small situation better. And so LP1 resonates, like customer obsession, that it resonates with me of like why I do what I do, and that synergy is part of what I think gels us together. So
I think so too. I think it's easy to forget that it's a human business.
Right.
It's like,
right. Yeah.
Ed, you were doing brainiac neuroscientist
exactly
stuff,
that's my lab. It was called the brainiac neuroscience stuff.
That sounds right to me. I would watch that podcast. I wouldn't understand it, but I would watch it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it is easy to forget that it's a human business, right? Like if you were working on a cure for cancer as a geneticist, then like that's so directly, obviously about helping human beings.
Right.
And if you're not directly doing that, are you not helping anybody? But think about what we do. Take that same VP of infrastructure 10, 15 years later, instead of shopping for object stores, now they're probably thinking about how do I fix that problem in the CI/CD pipeline or whatever. That's a
Right.
human being.
Right.
That's a human with a life and a work-life balance within that life. And if we're good at what we do, we put them in a much better work spot in their work life. And if we're shitty at what we do, we put them in a much worse spot in their work life. So, we're not curing cancer over here, but I think it's worthwhile. I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I get to talk to customers about solving problems and help them work through really complex problems. And then nobody expects me to be the smart one who's going to write all the code. I just had my cake and got to eat it too.
Right.
So, it is sometimes easy to forget, but we have the benefit of, we go out, we talk to the customers, we have those off the record one-on-one cell phone conversations once the project is a few weeks down the road and some of the pain is starting to subside already, and some of the angst is starting to subside already, and some of the leadership voices are starting to go, this is going to work. We're going to be okay.
Yeah.
This is going to, because most of the stuff we're doing is rather high stakes, right? There's most of our workload, if you looked across BUILDSTR, is not like, we'll get to that thing when we get to it. It's not that important. It's things that could be existential problems or existential opportunities or pursuits, right? But there's a very human, I guess, feedback loop or reward cycle when you say all this stuff about how you're going to be able to help them solve their problem, and they take a leap on you. They take a leap of faith. They take a flyer on you when they sign that contract.
Right.
And then the pressure starts. And then a few weeks in, when you see the pressure start to come off of them, it's almost like we take the pressure off of them and we bring it onto us. That's meaningful.
Right. 100%. Okay. So being head of sales and co-founder extraordinaire, there's a lot on your plate. So don't want to just sit here and like kind of bullshit for hours, even though we can and have done that at various times, and they're great conversations. We just had an awesome trip to New York. There's a lot of things that came out of that. Can you take a couple minutes and talk about some of the things that we're taking action on here in Q1?
Yeah, there's I think there was a big theme that came out of especially that trip and all the conversations we've had in the last, since reInvent, call it 3 months.
Right. Yeah.
There's been this consistent theme of there was an initial flash, like ChatGPT came out and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it, right? A few years ago.
Right.
And many of us got calls from our parents that have never touched AI or software or technology. And they're like, oh no, is everyone going to lose their jobs?
Skynet's coming.
Yeah, right. And maybe, maybe Skynet's already here, but that's for a different podcast. But I would say the theme that we're locked into right now is people are trying to figure out what to do with data. That's been true the last 10 years. Now, all of a sudden, ChatGPT just shifts that a little bit towards now we have to call everything Gen AI, even if it's not, just to be, in the realm of what's cool, right? Like object recognition is older than I am, but somehow now all of a sudden we're calling that a brand new Gen AI use case. I mean, that stuff aside, everybody's fired up about AI right now.
Right.
But there's the consistent theme is there are a lot of fundamentals and there are a lot of building blocks that some customers are skipping over. The ones that are skipping over it are having a hard time, and then finding that it would have been easier to do it right the first time. So we see a ton of customers that are trying to get to this big needle moving AI idea, but then they don't necessarily have all of their data getting ingested in a timely fashion and curated in the right way and set up and architected and cleaned and curated and tagged and organized. And like, think about what a warehouse is outside of the context of software and data.
Right. Yeah.
It's organized, it's labeled, it was designed intentionally to facilitate going and getting what you need and being able to get it quickly enough to get as many orders out of the manufacturing facility or the distribution facility as you need to per day. So
and you can control who has access to it, right? And you're
100%.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and you could, put the QR codes and scan them with the guns and whatever. That's a deep metaphor. We could keep going on that metaphor for the next 2 hours because data warehouses turns out were aptly named. But that's kind of the big theme is everybody's trying to get to AI, but what are the practical, pragmatic, real world things you can do to set yourself up for it and to pursue it and to not regret certain technology decisions that you've made? So like the Trainium POCs we're starting to do, Ed, that's one of those things where we could spin this big yarn about here's where you should take your business with AI, but most customers have something of an idea already. And many of our customers that are startups and ISVs are building their own models or taking industry standard models and training them up with their own data. And one of the relatively easy things to do is let's swap out that underlying compute for purpose-built chips. So we've seen the same thing a million times with Graviton, where customers are running workloads with very minimal, sometimes zero changes or minimal changes, swap out EC2 on Intel chips for EC2 on Amazon chips, and the cost to efficiency or the cost to performance ratio is through the roof. It's I say it the other way around.
Inverse.
The performance to cost. Yeah. A little dyslexia moment there, but the cost to performance ratio is amazing.
Right.
And so it was a natural, and it's the same company that Amazon acquired out of Austin who makes the Graviton chips and the Trainium chips. Right? That's right. And the Inferentia chips. So training, we hear over and over again from customers that training is 80% of the cost of ML solutions, whether it's an LLM or it's a 40-year-old anomaly detection random cut forest algorithm implementation. It doesn't matter. You're spending a ton of time, you're spending a ton of money training with very minimal changes, sometimes zero changes, swapping out the underlying EC2 instance for a Trainium chip. I mean, sometimes it's like 70% more performant for the dollar spent.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal. That's an actual pragmatic, practical thing you could do today. So that's kind of our space in the AI space. I don't see us necessarily becoming those management consultants who say, here's where you need to go based on what's going to happen in manufacturing over the next 5 years. Like we see things on the ground that lead us to be able to speak that way sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's usually the customer has some vision they're trying to pursue. And our job is to arrange ourselves so that we're saying, if you're going to do this, here's how to do it pragmatically. For this particular use case, you don't need a spaceship, so build a Toyota Camry.
Yeah.
For this other use case, we got to figure out how to build spaceships and, maybe take some, design inspiration from NASA or something. But who's going to do all that really hard plumbing?
Right.
The customers want the functionality. The board wants the functionality out the door. Wall Street's going to want to see some kind of a path. But who's going to get down into the foundation and make all of those decisions about how do we get the data house in order? How do we do it in a way where we know how it's going to scale our AWS bill? How do we do it in a way that we know it's going to be manageable and operable by our staff once the consultants leave? That's a big thing for us is we don't do annuity consulting here.
Right.
I don't want to build anything for a customer that now they're hostage to and they can't make a change without calling us and drafting up another project. We're trying to get to that self-sufficiency.
Yes.
And if we can take care of some of those foundational pieces for the customer while they figure out what's going to be the big game changer in their industry, that they can actually inhabit that space. And I think we're pretty useful in the AI space.
Yeah. So I just want to put the Trainium POC in a parking lot for a second, because you glazed over something that is like in the front of my face in multiple conversations, and it's that annuity consulting. I had a customer today go like, can we, and was kind of walking on eggshells, can we make sure that we own the IP at the end of this? And I was like, we're here to help you. And she was like, okay, we have another company that did some work for us, and we were kind of naive, and we just signed the contract, and we didn't see that we actually, part of this was a license. And so now we're paying them a licensing fee for the work that we did years ago, and we can't get away from it without rebuilding everything. And we see that a lot.
Again.
We see it a lot. And so that's something that's part of the core of our DNA. So we're trying to make sure to empower, like hands open, like run with it, be best in the world at what you're at. If you want to come back to us, great. But otherwise, we're going to help you with this thing, and you're ready to go. so I just didn't want to glaze over that, but for sake of time, Trainium POC, but then also buried in there was also, we have the ability to help with a Q accelerator. We've got funding available to us and so we can go in and help guide, where are you at? Are you going to be differentiated best in the world at what you're doing? What are the funding buckets from AWS that we have available to bring to the table? And then, are we going to help with the underlying foundation, infrastructure, data, and applications? Or are we going to help with the cool spaceships that go on top of that? Or are we going to do both? Yep. So I just wanted to wrap that up for sake of time. Anything else in there that you wanted to just tie off on?
No, I think what you're saying is right, that the Gen AI doesn't change the pattern of AI, where it's like if one of the AWS native pre-built machine learning AI services is going to work for your use case, then use it. Right. Like you can hire all the smartest people in the world to build you object recognition models, but you should probably do some testing of recognition, AWS recognition, to see if it works, because then you don't have to build and train custom models. Now, in some circumstances, it's not going to be accurate enough, or it's not going to be, you're going to for some reason need to specifically design to your use case or your data set or your customer expectation or whatever. Yeah. But it's the same in Gen AI as it was in, I guess now all of a sudden we're calling traditional AI. If there is a use case that you can just start using Amazon Q Business for, or Q and QuickSight for that natural language query stuff we were doing the other day, John, like if you can use one of those services that are pre-built already for the use case, do it. And then drop down to another layer of hands-on nerd knobs and levers when you need to, when there's a reason to. Yeah. So it's meeting the customer at the part of the stack that matters to them. If a customer is training custom models and they're down that road, then it doesn't make sense to try to pull them back up to just use Q. So let's see if Q works for this, because they're down the road. And that's maybe more of that training POC. Let's swap out the compute piece, make it a lot cheaper and faster. Okay. So it's the same pattern as it's always been. If there is the cloud native service is already there and it says, use me over an API call and I'll bill you for how much you'd use. That's the simplest, most pragmatic way to get started, and then take on more complexity when there's a business reason to, not when it's cool technology, because none of us have hours in the day to explore all of the cool technology, but drop down that layer of complexity when there's a business reason to.
Right. Okay. I think we're already over the time that I asked you to commit to this. There's still 3 things that I was like, I want to talk about that. So wrap up however you want to wrap up. If you want to, would love it if you mentioned the cool shit that we're doing, technically speaking, with well-architected framework reviews, and then the 2 database initiatives that we're working with. We've got some amazing folks in the database specialist team. Shout out to our good buddy Pete McHale. But those are the 3 other things that were like on my list of like, make sure to like talk to Kyle about that. So.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about a space where some pragmatic help making a very practical change to your stack is a big deal. Those database offerings or those database accelerators are a perfect example. Self-managed database, you should probably have a good reason. I'm sure there are good reasons out there for why you really need access to the low-level components of running your database on EC2, and you really feel like you need to keep those controls in your hands. But that's the 5%. The 95% is like, let's use RDS. Let's offload. Let's divest ourselves of the responsibility to do all this low-level administration. Let's give it to AWS, because RDS is sitting there just waiting for you to hand over low-level administration responsibilities. So the move to managed thing we're seeing really hot right now. And then the other piece has been consistent for about the past year and a half, maybe 2 years. Aurora is a smoke show. It's fast. It's already compatible with Postgres and MySQL. It's relatively easy to get started. If you look at what it used to take 10 years ago to make a change of your database engine, and you got a peek 10 years into the future of what it was going to be like to go to Aurora, you would laugh. You wouldn't believe it. So it's more simple than it used to be to change engines. The engine is compatible with Postgres, MySQL already. So from the database side, that's a perfect place where we jump in and talk to customers about practical, pragmatic changes that you can make that are going to make your life easier, not just pursue cool technology. Moving to RDS and upgrading to Aurora on RDS. And then it's been a mainstay 10 plus years that I've been in the AWS ecosystem. The well-architected framework is widely used. Like most of the time, a technology vendor publishes something like that. It's just kind of wall art. It's like you publishing a reference architecture, it might get referenced at some point at some time,
Sure,
but there's
sure.
really good stuff in the well-architected framework. So as advanced as some things have gotten, we still meet customers every day who just need us to take a look and make sure they didn't do anything boneheaded in like putting databases with sensitive data in public subnets. And there's unlimited intelligent capacity on the customer side. They just don't have unlimited time.
Yeah,
Very,
right.
very, very smart engineers can prioritize getting features out the door versus like, maybe we should go back and think about how Control Tower would help us centrally govern account creation. That's not where they've spent their time.
Right.
So even with all the crazy advanced stuff that happens, we still find on a day-to-day basis, customers need help with the basics, the fundamentals.
Right. Yeah. Just a quick anecdote on that. We had a customer the other day. It's actually two businesses, and we're talking to them about doing some cool stuff and starting with well-architected framework review. And they're like, yeah, we're best in the world at this thing. We just don't know if we're using AWS right. For example, we're just using our main account, and then whenever we need new permissions, we just add them per person. We're like, okay, great. That's helpful to know. And that's the place where we can help you get up to well-architected very quickly with our landing zone accelerator and whatever. So
I think that's a really good example. I think I'd be retired if I had $1 for every time I heard a customer say, we're not 100% sure our IAM roles and permissions are set up right. Because it's complex. And then it evolves. And if if you didn't spend the time up front to think about how that strategy would scale, then you're probably going to end up with a little bit of a mess at some point. And it's very difficult to prioritize that type of work when you're the first handful of product developers getting a new thing out the door. You've got your seed round, you've got your Series A, you're building the thing. Investors are excited about the thing. Hopefully customers are excited about the thing. You got to build the thing.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you have to prioritize IAM and VPC design and stuff until later.
Right.
You wait too long and it's going to become a problem. But you can see why there are good reasons customers don't do it right away. So there's this natural, it's like spring cleaning. You get to April and you just get this sense of like, man, I should clean out the cellar. Been a while. It's just bothering me. It's not organized, and so you get the thing out the door, you get your initial traction. At some point, you're going to want to re-baseline. So if I had $1 for every time we heard that, we'd probably all be retired.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Johnny D, any last thoughts?
No, this was great. I love talking with both of y'all. This was a good episode.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining John and Ed's Tech Talk Together Tuesdays.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored.
Oh, mine's not doing it.
All right. We'll just imagine it in.
We'll imagine it.
All right. Well, Kyle, we'll definitely have you on again. Thank you. And everybody who has made it this far, thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.